93% of your life is spent indoors, but so many of our favorite moments are outdoors. The fresh air, the feeling of peace. Since warmer weather is almost here, let's make the most of it with Outer, the new outdoor furniture company with purposely designed furniture to get you outdoors more.
Outer makes the world's most beautiful, comfortable, innovative, and high-quality outdoor furniture, all from sustainable materials. I love the new outdoor dining table and chairs I just bought. It looks great in my backyard, and it's the perfect setup for hosting a dinner party. Go to liveouter.com/thefounderhour to see all the incredible products they have to offer.
For a limited time, get 10% off. That's liveouter.com/thefounderhour. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey everyone, before we get into the episode, just a quick reminder, if you enjoy what you hear, please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. That way you get notified when new episodes drop. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at The Founder Hour. Let's get into it. John Neman, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Heard you're an LA guy. Well, we talked about it offline, but I know your parents immigrated here from Iran. Give us a little bit of background on them and, your early life.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I think my parents' story, immigrant story, was a huge part of my upbringing. My parents immigrated here in 1979. They were born in Iran. Came here, persecution, they were Jewish, and so came here in 1979 with much of our community, had to flee.
Is that the Ayatollah Khomeini
Correct.
revolution?
Yeah. And so when the Shah was deposed and Khomeini came in, almost overnight, they had to leave.
My parents actually grew up in Iran too. So I'm Armenian, but Persian Armenian.
Oh, really?
So I'm
you speak
very
Farsi?
familiar. I don't speak, but I know the story. And, Armenians, Christians in Iran at the time.
We have a very similar, we have a very similar story. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, that's always been part of, what kind of my upbringing.
Right.
And, I think what I learned from them is they had to pick up everything overnight and leave a life that they had and start all over.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this idea that nothing in life is permanent and this idea of starting something from scratch again and starting over was something I watched my parents do, the whole community, as you guys did as well. And so from a very early age, I think there was no option other than being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I think I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. And, it was almost a dream of mine since I was a kid. I remember as a kid going to work with my dad, and he'd wear a suit. So I tried to, I asked to put on a suit and walk through his, my dad was in the textile business. And so
he's also an entrepreneur.
Yeah, also an entrepreneur. And so I'd go to the warehouse and I'd walk around with him. And from a very early age, I think taught about this idea, what business is and how to start something from nothing, and always kind of knew that's what I wanted to do. I never thought that I would be in the restaurant business. I always loved food, but never in my life thought, had a dream or vision growing up to be in restaurants.
Yeah.
But I definitely knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur.
What was food like for your family or for your upbringing? Like, did you guys bond over that or obviously being, Middle Eastern or Iranian or Armenian or just like those cultures, food is such a big part of it. And there's so many dishes that, our grandparents and great grandparents made that kind of stays in the family. And so, what was it like for you?
Yeah, it was, food was a huge part of it. Sunday barbecue and, Friday night, Shabbat dinners, those are both the power of food to bring people together is something that I learned at a very early age, in the power of community. And so, I just loved food, loved to explore new food, and really learned early on that great food all came down to the ingredients. And I think that's something that I learned very early and grew to love. But for me, it was, again, it was never a goal to start restaurants. It was a goal to start a business that would have a positive impact in the world. That's something that I knew that, I really do believe in the power of capitalism. And I do believe in, the amazing, while some people are critical of America, I think it's the greatest place in the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that the opportunity here, that anyone can come here and start something from nothing mm-hmm. is just incredible. And so that meritocracy, the power of capitalism, and, just these ideals that this country was founded on is something that has always really resonated with me from a very early stage.
Yeah.
And, for me, the core value that, was always something that was always part of me that I brought to Sweetgreen was this idea of win-win-win. And for us, the win-win-win is this idea of creating solutions where the customer, the community, and the company win. And that brings me back to my view on business as a source to do great in the world. Mm-hmm. And I don't think, I think a lot of people try to create a business and then make an impact somewhere else in the world on the side.
Yeah.
For me, it's always been, how can you use business as a vehicle for positive impact?
The social entrepreneurship aspect of things.
Correct.
I'm curious because I assume as a kid you weren't necessarily thinking of all this stuff, and no kid really does think of this stuff. But what did you enjoy doing as a kid? Were you into sports? Were you, I don't know, into theater? I don't know. What were you into?
What was I into? I was into sports. I played video games. I was into sports. I was into music a lot. Music has been a huge passion. If there's anything I thought maybe I would do was
playing music, or
more just I loved music. I always tried playing music. I was never great at it, but I was so interested in both following music, but also the music, like the business of the music industry. That's probably what I thought I would go into,
like working at a label or something like that.
Yeah, that was like
Talent
I was an intern at a label at one point. But
which one? I was at Warner Music Group.
I was at Atlantic.
Okay.
But for me, it was always that entrepreneurial hustle. So
yeah,
a lot of businesses growing up. So whether it was, lemonade stands early, or when I got a little older, I would coach and tutor kids. When I was in high school, I started this thing called the Young Entrepreneurs Club. And the club was really just 3 people when we started. And we were 3 kids that loved the idea of entrepreneurship. We were in 10th grade. And at first, we decided to bring guest speakers. We're like, all right, we're going to bring some guest speakers. We're going to talk about entrepreneurship. After a few weeks, we're like, we should do something more than just talk about it. What if we actually started something? So we started this idea, and we realized that I went to Beverly Hills High School here. And one of the things that our school did not have, many schools had, were these agenda books, these like planners. I don't know if these even exist in the day of in the day of iPhones,
right? But
it was a very simple thing of just like your planner that you wrote down all your notes and these things in. So we had this idea: what if we could go create this planner? We would design the planner, we would sell the planner, but our idea was to sell it very cheaply, pretty much at cost, to get maximum distribution across the school. The school had over 2,000 kids, and so what we did is we got almost the whole entire school to buy the planners. So we had the built-in distribution, and that way we could go to advertisers and sell advertising on the planners.
So it's kind of like a loss leader, if you will.
Yeah, like a loss leader. Like it was a break even up, sell them at cost, and then sell advertising. And in 10th grade, we would sell it for in a planner like $30,000 in advertising.
Not bad
on the planner, and we did this for a few years.
Was the goal at the time to like make money, or was it just a fun project for you guys?
I think I always look at business has to make money, and so I always looked at it as something. We've had this philosophy of passion and purpose, something you love to do that you're really driven by. And so, the goal was to make money, but also provide a useful service that people loved in the world.
Yeah.
It's funny that you say that because, and Pat and I have been doing this for 6.5 years now, and nobody really says the opposite of that statement, which is business is not to necessarily make money. But a lot of the people that we've interviewed, not a lot and not most, but a good amount of the people that we've interviewed have gone on to start companies that aren't necessarily making money, especially not from day one, maybe not even in year 5. Maybe it takes 5, 10, 15 years to be profitable. I'm sure you've heard of these companies too. But when we're jumping around a lot here, but when you had the idea and you and your partners had the idea of starting Sweetgreen, was that the goal from day one? Was, we're going to start something that we believe in, but it's got to make money. It can't just be losing money for God knows how long, and then somehow, some way, we'll figure out how to make money.
I think you have to have a plan in terms of what the long-term vision is,
right?
And businesses go through different cycles. So when we started, we had no capital.
Yep.
We started the business, and we raised absolute minimum we could raise to open that first restaurant. We raised about $300,000 to open our first restaurant. It was 500 square feet. We were seniors in college. It wasn't even enough money to open that restaurant. We ended up owing a lot of money to our contractor and maxing out credit cards and the whole thing. And we had to show that the unit economics worked for that first restaurant. And then we had to do the same for the second restaurant and the third restaurant. And we ran it that way really for about 20 restaurants. It was at that point, once we got to 20 restaurants, where we were able to fundraise for a bigger vision. We'd then proven that the unit economics work. Each individual restaurant makes money, but we wanted to build something much, much bigger. And once every generation in our industry, in the restaurant industry, a brand breaks through. And this is a brand that, we're a company that owns all of our restaurants. We're not a franchise group. So we build, operate, and run every single thing we do. Most people probably don't realize that most restaurants, chain restaurants you see in the United States, are franchise restaurants. Right. They're not actually owned. They're really two really large companies, Chipotle and Starbucks, that own their restaurants for the most part. And so our vision was always to be one of those companies that can kind of break through and be a once-in-a-generation global iconic brand. So at that point, we actually did raise, we raised a significant amount of funds over the next few years, and capital was pretty freely available in this period. And we were able to build the infrastructure to support our much bigger vision. Right. So we did go for a while in a world of losing money, and we've just come out of it recently.
Yeah, COVID didn't really help your cause.
And COVID didn't help it, but we had it, for us, it was building the infrastructure, whether that be the supply chain, the brand, the operating team, to build something much, much bigger, including things like automation. So we've, very intentionally made a lot of investments. We've been fortunate to have the capital in order to do it, but it's all been with this view towards the long term, really building something. The aim was never to get to 200 stores. The aim was always to build something really, really big.
Right. And we'll come back to that piece, but I want to kind of take it back to John in high school and being this kid who's interested in entrepreneurship and, running this entrepreneur club. Like every kid in high school, there comes a point where you have to decide, like, okay, do I go to college, first of all? Second, what am I studying in college? And for someone who's interested in entrepreneurship, sometimes or most times, it's probably like business, right? And, studying business doesn't always equate or like set you up well for entrepreneurship. It probably sets you up well to go on Wall Street or consulting or something. But I'm just curious for you, what was your mindset at the time? And I know you went to Georgetown. What did you think like your life would look like, and what were you studying and all that kind of stuff?
So I finished high school and I went to Georgetown partially because they had a business school, and I really did want to study business. I looked at a lot of different schools, but it was probably the best school I got into. I was keen on leaving Los Angeles. I actually visited Georgetown while they were on spring break, so I'm just like, oh, it's a pretty.
That's where I'm going to go.
Like it's a pretty school. I didn't really meet anyone, but I'm like, it's beautiful. It was a beautiful day, and I kind of made that decision.
Thank God you didn't go to like Missouri during the spring break or something.
So it was, for me at Georgetown, I actually learned a lot from my business classes. I think they did give me certain fundamentals around things like finance and accounting and certain things. But to your point, the real thing about building a business is really about leadership. And as many management classes you take, as many cases that you can read, I don't think you can really do it until you try it yourself.
Just got to throw yourself into it.
And throw yourself into it. I probably, when I went to college, and even when I graduated college, I probably thought that I was going to go work for a while and continue to learn and train. And that was always my idea. Starting Sweetgreen was almost accidental. We just had this idea that was burning inside of us that were like, how come this does not exist? I had just gotten back from studying in Australia for study abroad for like 6 months. And I saw this culture where healthy food was cool. And in the US, especially at the time, and this is going back 2006, the cool restaurants were not the healthy restaurants. Yeah. And, we came back, and with my two co-founders, we kind of shared this vision and this kind of yearning problem that we had in our own life of why can't there be a place to eat that is delicious and healthy and convenient and affordable? Like, and why is our best answer in the US for fast food like McDonald's? Like, how is that going to be the brand of this next generation? And so we, at first it was, let's just open one, because we were kind of had that entrepreneurial itch. We're like, we thought it'd be super easy, to be honest. We're like, how hard could it be to open a restaurant? Tiny little place. We're going to sell salads. We're going to go buy the kitchen equipment. We're going to go to the farmer's market. We're going to buy the food.
You do that at home. I mean, it's like,
yeah, we're like, how hard can this be? No idea all of everything that goes around it.
Right.
And I always like to say that the naivete, the not knowing what we didn't know, was such a beautiful advantage.
Right.
Because I think as you learn more and more, and you get older and you learn more, a lot of fear sets in.
Mm-hmm.
And your risk tolerance changes. And one thing that, I believe is you can't really fall from the floor. So when you're 22 years old, you're graduating college, the expectation was so low. We already weren't making any money.
Yep.
We didn't have families. All these things weren't there. So it allowed us to take this really big risk just because we were at this, we were where we were, and we were lucky to see this opportunity. But we didn't know what we didn't know, and I think that was a huge advantage in taking those risks.
John, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because we hear, the naivete thing all the time. It's on all entrepreneurs, and it's true. But I think for folks that are listening, I think they hear that and they say, okay, but there's all these what ifs and why nots, and we shouldn't do that, or that's not how it's done, or hasn't been done before. Can you give some concrete examples of something that you guys did that, had you known, knowing now what you know, you would have done differently, or maybe not even done at all?
That's a good question. So, first of all, I don't think we realize how hard it is to build a restaurant.
Like physically,
like how hard it is.
Grease trap. And
when we didn't even think about sanitation lines,
Right.
grease traps, and we rented this concrete box.
Right.
It had no utilities, no water line, no sanitation line, and we didn't know. Today we would have never ever taken that location. It's too small. It didn't have any of the things, and it was probably not in a great location. Objectively, it was not a great location. It was a cool location because it had this iconic look to it, and it was kind of close to campus,
Right.
but also on M Street. But we just, I think if we had known any of those things, we wouldn't do it. It did force us to get really, really creative, and I'll give you a few examples. Like, the space was so small where we didn't have enough storage in the unit. To give you an idea, our restaurants today are about 2,500 feet. This restaurant was 500. So
It's like a closet.
It's like a closet, and it has an ADA bathroom. So if you think like it's an ADA bathroom, like tiny little kitchen, a line, no seating inside. But we had no storage, and so our idea is you have to start to solve problems. So there was a park. We were attached to like a parking garage. So what we did is we rented 2 parking spots from the parking lot company. And we got them to let us build out 2 of the spots and drywall it and put all our refrigeration and dry goods there. So that restaurant, the way it ran is we had a cart where you'd have to take it from the parking lot, down the ramp, 2 levels, and then down a cobblestone alley, and then bring the product in the restaurant and then prep the product. We would never do that today.
Yeah.
But it was that constraint of the size that
you had
forced us
to.
to get.
No choice.
We had no choice, but it was also, I think, from a very early on, that I've always believed that constraint drives creativity, and it forces you to think about, cool, creative ways to build the brand and tell the story while keeping the menu really simple. I think if our first space was bigger, we would have probably done much more than salad. We would have probably sold smoothies.
You should show some sandwiches here.
Yeah, sandwiches. It was so small that we had to keep it super simple.
Right.
And I think that was one of the things that forced, the simplicity was one of the factors to success, because we became really great at one thing. And I think great businesses kind of own their niche, scale that, and then expand from their core. And so, all to say, I think that constraint was very, very valuable for us.
You should build a 500 square foot box in your office and force all the new employees to come up with a cool concept and see what happens.
It would be actually really interesting. And some of the mistakes we've made is, as we've gotten bigger, you take bigger space and
Right.
it's not always better.
Right.
So going back to, you're in college, and before you even think of the idea for Sweetgreen, you talk about wanting healthier food. Growing up in a Middle Eastern family, there's a lot of food, and it's not always the healthiest, right? I mean,
Hey, the Mediterranean diet's pretty good.
No, there are, but it's some foods could be oily or
Hummus,
what have you. Yeah. So I'm just curious, when did your healthy food awakening come, and why were you just wanting healthier food?
So for me, it was I think the word health is it's a big word, right? What does health mean? And health means different things to different people. For me, healthy has always been about just real ingredients, unprocessed food. So I do think like if you're making Persian food, Armenian food at home with good real ingredients, even if it happens to have lots of olive oil or it's meat or these things,
It's not processed food.
I consider that healthy.
Yeah.
For me, that's nutritious and it's real. The other thing that I think what got me to fall in love with this idea of nutritious and like well-sourced healthy food was I realized that the foods that I loved, the best food, the taste came from the quality of the ingredients.
Yeah.
And I think some people sometimes don't get Sweetgreen. What they misunderstand about Sweetgreen is Sweetgreen as a health food restaurant, and the things that we do are to make it healthy. I do think it is healthy, but the reason we're so obsessed about the sourcing of the food is that's what you can taste. I love the In-N-Out slogan, quality you can taste.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the idea of it is we do these things not only because they're good for you, but because that's what makes the food taste really good. It's that pop of flavor and freshness from how we source the food. We were just talking about Nancy Silverton.
Yeah.
Right.
She shares this philosophy of like where she gets the food from. It shows up in a totally different
Alice
way.
Waters, who's
and these
came
are
up with that.
Yes, Alice Waters and Nancy. These are the people that we looked up to, and we're like, we just want to do a fast food version of that.
Right.
We want to do what the chefs are doing, buy the food from where they're buying it, and figure out a format that can be more accessible and kind of democratize it for more people. Yeah.
So John, Pat and I talk about this like offline ad nauseum with one another as friends. We've talked about it on the podcast with different guests, and every time we go to Europe, like anywhere in Europe, or I know when you went to Armenia last couple years ago, the food there, the ingredients there. Let's not say food, but the ingredients there, they're all already kind of good.
Yeah,
right? Like you're not like I got to pick between the organic and the non-organic. It's just everything's organic. I went to San Sebastian a couple years ago. I was having tomatoes, and I've never tasted tomatoes like that in my life. Like I might be a vegan in San Sebastian, just because of those tomatoes.
I love San Sebastian.
Yeah, one of the best places in the world for food specifically. But how knowing that fact of the world and the ingredients out there versus the U.S., was it a challenge to find and source good stuff early on? Not only for Sweetgreen, but even for yourself, like before, whether you were in high school, college, at home, how were you guys able to find and source the right good ingredients?
Yeah, what's interesting is when we first started, it was actually not that hard to find because our scale was so small.
Right.
And it was this food exists out there. The problem is the distribution network of providing this food at scale is the challenging part. So when we started, it's very easy to make relationships with farmers. We made it through the farm. We literally go to the farmer's market, make relationship, make deals with the farmers directly, have a distributor move the product. The challenges around sourcing actually happened as we began to scale and got bigger and had much greater needs, as well as started to grow to multiple regions. And then it was, how do we do this a lot of places? So what I sometimes say is, like, if you wanted to replicate Sweetgreen in one store, you could do it. You can do it. Now do it in 225 stores or 1,000 stores. That's where the challenge really arises.
Interesting.
So going back to college. You're in college. How does the idea come about? And then I know you and two others partnered up, Nick and Nate.
Yes.
What was going on at the time between you guys, and why did you think like this was the thing that you wanted to do, at the time?
So Nick and Nate were two of my good friends in college. I met Nick the first day I walked into Georgetown. I was, so lucky. I walk into my dorm, and next door, as I'm moving in, right next door, Nick is moving into his dorm. And Nick was from New York, and his family was in the restaurant business. And so with my love of food and his love of food, we immediately bonded. And one of the things we bonded over was how bad the food was at the cafeteria, and our venture out into the community and out into the city to explore different foods. So we were kind of like food buddies that would go explore food and kind of kept that relationship going.
And was he also interested in entrepreneurship like you?
And also, parents were also immigrants, also entrepreneurs, and shared a love of entrepreneurship. And I'll come back to that. Nate, I met first day of class. So a couple of days later, first day of class, I walk into Accounting 101 and I see, go to Georgetown. It's, in Washington, D.C. Kids from LA kind of stood out pretty obviously. So like Nate's sitting like right behind me and he's wearing like an LA Dodgers cap and Converse. And you're like, okay, like
I know all about this.
Yeah. It's like, well, you kind of dressed like a skater kid and, same as me. And we're like, okay, like we're going to be friends. Immediately became friends. And he had a similar story. His parents also immigrated here. His mom from Mexico, his dad from Taiwan, also immigrants. So we shared that draw to entrepreneurship and starting a business. We all took this class while we were at Georgetown, an entrepreneurship class. A wonderful professor that we're still close with. His name was Will Finnerty. And we all actually took it at different times. But it was a very influential class for all of us. And Nick was actually the TA by the time I took the class. And so I think that it almost became this like common language between us from taking this class. And in the class, you have to do a competition, like a business case competition.
We had one called E-Challenge where you had to go out and actually like create a business and make money.
Correct.
Yeah.
What was interesting about our time there is by the time I was the last person to take the class, I was taking it senior year, first semester. And that was the point where we were beginning to write the business plan for Sweetgreen. And I wanted to use it for the class because I was actually going to do it. What was interesting was the class didn't allow you to use restaurants because restaurants were not, quote, scalable businesses. Not only that, but it was really interesting. While the entrepreneurship teacher, Will, was super supportive of us, it was amazing to see how much, as I would ask different professors and people, like mentors, how many people told me it was like the worst idea ever. Like it was like so many people are like, just, you're crazy. They did the stats, 90% of restaurants close. Why don't you go lose money? I remember someone saying, go lose money on someone else's dime. Yeah. All of these, kind of things.
Positive messages?
Yeah, positive messages. But for me, those kinds of things always kind of drive me. I don't know. It's something about I like this like underdog mentality.
It never discouraged you?
No, it actually kind of drives me. Even today when I get, Nate, when I feel naysayers on what we're trying to do, it actually gives me a little bit more of that fire to prove people wrong.
But it's, when you hear people say that and you try to understand why they're saying it, especially if they're a professor of entrepreneurship, they must know a lot, right? Or like maybe they do, maybe they don't. But you hear people that have done things and they say, this is not a scalable business, and you're this kid in college, never started a business before. Most people will probably be like, okay, maybe he's right. Maybe they're right. It's and when you really think about it, I mean, in retrospect, like you said, that naivete helps, but there are like statistics that show that food businesses are not always great businesses, right? Like, and you guys have innovated along the way, obviously, and that's what has kept, I'm sure, the Sweetgreen sustainable. But at the time, like, did you have this like feeling inside where it's like all these people don't know what they're saying, and I know that I'm going to make this work one way or another?
All the naysayers really forced us to do our homework, and so we got to get senior year, we start chatting, and the three of us had talked about business ideas a lot. And then it was senior year, we'd all got back, we were trying to figure out what we're going to do with our lives after college. And we started talking about this idea of like, what if there was a kind of healthy place to eat? As I said, I had just gotten back from Australia. I'd kind of seen this. Nick was from the food business. Nate was very interested in like creating a brand. And so it all like kind of came together by chance where we started talking about this idea. And at first we decided we were going to do it in earnest. But I think originally it was, let's just open one restaurant. We started at the beginning of senior year. It was like fall of senior year. We thought it would be open by like, by February, March, we'd be open. Our idea, this is kind of crazy. We were like, we're going to hire a manager. We're all going to go on with our lives. We're going to have this one restaurant. It was going to be like a fun experience. As soon as we started doing it, realizing it was much harder than we expected. It was going to take more time, cost more than what we expected. But also as we started peeling back, like the understanding of the industry and the opportunity, we realized this could be so much bigger than one store. This wasn't a problem just in our own lives. Mm-hmm. But I think what gave us confidence was we were the customer originally. In a lot of ways, we were designing for ourselves and for our friends. So it was very authentic. Like what we put out was like, this is what we want. We want to eat this every day. We know another few hundred people that want to eat this every day. And, we just did the math. I remember we did the math on the space. We're like, okay, here's the rent. Here's how many people we have to serve a day. And I remember we would go and we would do counts. We would go to every restaurant in the area. I remember going to like Subway and Dean and DeLuca and Chipotle, all these places, and standing outside and literally counting how many customers they got. And we got to the place where we're like, okay, we only need to serve, call it like 100 and something customers a day, and we'll be good. And it was that, that deep homework, and getting clear on what it was, what the break even was, and this idea of like starting really small to prove something that gave us the conviction to go and do it. And I do give a lot of credit to all of our parents. They sent us to Georgetown. It's like, hoping we were going to go get some big job and go on to do something. And we go tell all of them that like, actually we're not turning down we're turning down a career in investment banking or consulting or whatever else. And we're going to go run this like tiny little salad shack.
Yep.
And
did you feel like did you have this like plan B in mind at all? Of like, if it doesn't work out, I can go get a job? Or were you just so like, did you have so much conviction in this concept that you're like, this is going to work out for sure?
I did think it was going to work out, but there was always, you're 22 years old. There's always a plan B. Even if you're 6 years old, there's a plan B. Right. I think it's easier plan B when you're 22. And like I said, you can't fall from the floor. Mm-hmm. You're at that level. And hey, if it fails, you're back to exactly where you started. But yeah, it was okay. Maybe I'd go to business school. Maybe I'd go be a consultant. Maybe I'd go do venture capital. Maybe I'd go in the music business. I was never worried, and I think this may be something I learned from my parents of like maybe immigrating here and starting over. And what they really valued was education and resiliency and this idea of being able to pull yourself up from your bootstraps. And so even if it all failed, like you pick back up and you can start over, even today.
Customers are rushing to your store. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. Shopify POS is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point of sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/founderhour. Once again, go to shopify.com/founderhour to take your retail business to the next level today.
How did you guys fund the first store?
So the first store we funded, we raised about $300,000 from friends and family, some professors, some classmates. We had 50 people invest in our first round.
And were you giving them equity?
Yeah, so equity is, so imagine 50 people to raise $300,000. So think about
$6,000.
Yeah, it was like the average check was like, like the biggest check was $20,000.
You need someone full-time just managing that cap table.
Oh my God. And this is, before Cardo, we were on just doing it on spreadsheets. We had to talk to hundreds and hundreds of people.
That's not an ad for Cardo, by the way, but if you're interested in sponsoring.
But it was I think I always say like raising money is kind of this like going through the gauntlet. You have to really believe it so much in yourself and perfect your thinking and your plan to prove to other people. We at the time we had no idea what we were doing in terms of raising money, and there was not much of a market for raising money for a restaurant company. So what we did is we actually raised money for the restaurant, just the restaurant. It wasn't for
the business.
And then restaurant 2, we did the same. So we went to another 50 investors and raised, a little bit more money. It was like $600,000 for the second restaurant. And then the third restaurant, we did the same. After 3 restaurants, we had 3 separate companies with different investors across 3 of them. And the deal was each restaurant had to distribute all of its cash flow quarterly.
It's like real estate deals.
It was like a real estate deal. Like we didn't know any better. We just kind of like, got an attorney that was like this is kind of how when you open like a single restaurant, this is kind of how you structure it. You invest in the restaurant and you get the cash flows from the restaurant. We didn't know any better, and that's how we did it. What was good is we owned like the IP. Mm-hmm. And so after 3 restaurants, it was a very painful and challenging legal challenge and financial structuring. But we went to all of the investors across all 3 restaurants, and we said, hey, we'll trade you your ownership of, you have 5% in Sweetgreen Georgetown, and I'm going to give you 1% or whatever in
Common stock.
like the holding company.
Yeah.
So we kind of like restructured the company, and what that allowed us to do is reinvest the profits and also start to think about building a brand, not just individual restaurants.
Was Sweetgreen one an immediate success?
It was a relative, the bar was low. It was so small that the bar was pretty low. And I'd say, yeah, for the most part, we opened in August 1st. It was relatively slow the month of August, but as soon as the students came back, it did well. It wasn't until the winter that it got really challenging. We didn't have any working capital. We almost kind of went out of business that winter. So that was a really, really hard moment for us. But once it got a little warmer, business did better. And the business did $1 million in its first year, almost like exactly $1 million, which was...
Shows that people wanted it.
Yeah, and our plan for the first restaurant, we were hoping to do like 600,000 the first year. And so it was pretty good.
Yeah, keeps you going. After
Yeah.
that. I know you raised a lot of money from Steve Case. We've had on the show too, and it's interesting to me because it almost seems like him included, but I'm sure you guys too were looking at Sweetgreen as more than just a food business, like a restaurant. You were looking at it as like a brand, a tech company, even. And like, I'm curious how far ahead you saw at that point. Like, what was your grand vision early on? After you realized, okay, we need to expand from one restaurant and make it, to more locations. Like, yeah, like what was your? Do you remember like what the vision was?
Yeah, of course. So, a lot of people always ask, is like Sweetgreen a food company, a brand, a tech company? We're a restaurant company and a brand. We use technology like any great business should to enable and accelerate. And I think we were very lucky in the time in which we were created. We were, born in 2007. Right after we started, the iPhone came out. So the world changed. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, everybody had this computer in their pocket, this remote control in their pocket that could do a lot. And I think we were very lucky in the fact that we saw that change. We were digital natives and kind of saw the power of mobile and technology to transform consumer experiences. It was almost obvious to us when our biggest problem after a few stores was we had these long lines and we could only service as fast as one line could go. I'm like, well, why can't you could buy like clothes online. You could buy a lot of stuff at that point, a lot of things online or on your phone. Mm-hmm. Why can't you order food on your phone and make the line go faster?
And this so is pre like DoorDash, Postmates.
This is like 2009, 2010. Yeah. It was like, why not just be able to use the phone to cut the line? That was like the simple idea.
It's like early days of the iPhone.
Yeah, early days of iPhone. So we were like one of the first people to like have, build an app and build a second line. So it was almost, you had two restaurants in one restaurant. One kind of line for your app orders, one line for in store. And so we've always seen technology as a way to more directly connect with our consumers. The app was a huge part of that. We've seen it as a way to build efficiencies and scale a very complex sourcing and scratch cooking model. So as an example, we make all our food from scratch in our restaurants. We're washing, chopping, prepping, cooking all this food. And at scale, 225 locations, over 7,000 employees, that can be very hard to maintain consistency. What most restaurants do is they stop making things in the restaurant and they push the complexity to like a commissary, and it kind of comes in a bag and you pour it out. So you do less in the restaurant. For us, we're like, that's our core value proposition, that freshness. So what we did is we built tools in the restaurant, things like we have a cold prep tool, we have a hot prep tool. It's essentially like an app that we built that runs the kitchen. So when you're working the kitchen, it's kind of like a GPS for the kitchen. So it helps guide you in doing that. We realized that, on the consumer side, we realized that the connectivity to the customer was a huge opportunity, not just, for pickup, but for payment. Mm-hmm. It was an opportunity for CRM and communication. Oh, now we can do delivery through it. It just started to unlock a bunch of potential. And so we invested heavily in tech as an enabler to what we do. But, Sweetgreen is no way, if we didn't have to build any of it and I could just Shopify it, I'd be totally fine with that. The reality is we had to pay a lot of pioneer tax because it didn't exist. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important for everyone to remember what is your core business? And for us, it's always been creating great experiences and serving delicious food to our consumers.
Yeah.
And just using the technology as an enabler to that.
As it started to grow and you had more and more locations and seemingly more and more people, right? Not only in the restaurants, but in your like headquarters. What was it like in terms of your ability to lead people and like learning that skill that maybe you hadn't obviously had before? Because, it's like a thing that we talked about earlier about throwing yourself into it and just learning along the way. Like, was it challenging for you? Was it something that came naturally to you?
I think parts of it came naturally and parts of it I'm still learning and growing. I think what's good about as you grow a company and scale it is, I don't know if you guys have kids.
Not yet.
But, sometimes I see my friends that have like teenage kids and I'm like, whoa, that looks really really hard. Like some really challenging like questions as a parent.
Yeah.
What's good is you start in diapers and you kind of grow with the kid. And
you start with shit and then it gets harder.
It gets harder. Like when you start, it's just like keep them alive. And then, my son is 3.5. He started asking me about heaven and like death recently. It's like, okay, it's starting to get more complicated.
We got real deep there, bud.
It's getting real, it's getting a little bit.
You got romaine and like, other types of lettuce, but not heaven. Hell
yeah. He asked me the other day, he's like, we read a book about believing you can do anything, great book called Dream Big. And he's like, I'm like, you can anything you want, anything you believe you can do. He goes, oh, I believe I can fly. I'm like, well, yes, but like maybe on an airplane or like I just don't want him to like jump off something.
Yeah.
And he goes, no, Daddy. He goes, when I get old, I will become an angel and I can fly. He goes, everyone will fly one day. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how to answer this.
Yeah.
It was a statement he made, not a question. So he's telling you it's a fact.
But all to say, I think, like kids, as you scale an organization, it grows you, but you have to really be, I think the key for me is being very reflective across each stage of the journey and thinking about how to level up and how that job changes. Mm-hmm. When we started, our job was actually running the restaurant. Like I was the cashier. I was making the food. I was in the restaurant.
I was going to ask, how did you, Nate and Nick, split your time? Having 3 co-founders, we've seen so many examples where it hasn't worked out because it hasn't been clear like who's doing what. So like, did you guys have like ownership over a part of the business early on? Or it sounds like you guys were just like, whatever's needed to be done, like you do that, I'll do this. Like
for a while, it was just whatever needed to be done. And then slowly we kind of developed our core lanes, which still exist today. Nick was always kind of all things food, a lot of things around experience and develop, what the store experience looks and feels like, the supply chain, the food. Mm-hmm. Nate was always about kind of the brand, the marketing, and the narrative. And I was always running kind of like a lot more like the business side and the operations and the HR and the finance and kind of the technology. So we always kind of had those loosely defined, but for a very long time, we were co-CEOs, and it wasn't until I think 2017 that we actually made those titles official.
Yeah.
But as I've grown through this, it's some of it just happens naturally. Your leadership growth, a lot of it has to be intentional, and I think it's amazing today, like how much you can learn from podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I learn a ton from it. I have a lot of other friends that are CEOs or entrepreneurs that we share notes and we talk on. I read a lot of books around it. I have I have a coach that I've worked with. And I think back to this idea of knowing what we don't know, when we started, we knew so little and knew we knew so little that the getting investors process, what was good about it is it forced us to find advisors. Yeah. That old saying of like, if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. And kind of like, So we really went, and we were very lucky. I got to say, there's so many people early on that were kind of the legends that we looked up to in food or in different industries, whether it be, And Gary Hirschberg, who started Stonyfield, or very early on took us under his wing, or Walter Robb, one of the CEOs of Whole Foods. Like some of these guys, when we were like super young, kind of came and put us under their wing and taught them. And so I've really taken to the power of mentorship, and I do try to pay that forward as well, because I think it's such a powerful thing to have someone else who's been there before, just kind of guiding you throughout.
Yeah. I think it was a couple years ago, right, when Sweetgreen went public.
Mm-hmm.
What was the thinking behind that? Like, obviously it was a great time, in the markets too. What was the thinking behind going public, and how has it been since being a public company CEO?
So the thinking was, we want to build a once in a generation global iconic brand. And in order to do it, we need a lot of capital to fund store growth, to fund a number of our investments. And we saw that going public was the best way to do that. I see an IPO as the start of another chapter and really not as an exit. And so we saw it as what it is a financing.
Mm-hmm.
You're not selling, you're infusing cash into the balance sheet. And the market was at a good time. The company was in a place where we thought it was a good time to have that cash infusion. It was the most capital efficient way to load up our balance sheet to fund us so we can be self-sustaining as we look forward. I think overall it's been a great experience. I think it's brought a lot of accountability. I think what's challenging about public markets is you report quarterly, even though you're building something for 20 or 30 years. I think that what I've really tried to do with my team, and even in terms of how I speak to the markets, is let them know that we are building something for the long term. And I think the right balance is short-term accountability, but still long-term focus. Mm-hmm. And what I tell my team all the time is, like, I never want you to make a decision that hurts us in the long term that maybe helps us this quarter. Mm-hmm. Like, I want us to really Bezos mentality, that day one mentality of really continuing to make decisions for the long term. And I've always prided myself on still the largest shareholder of the company. I like to treat it as if it's still like a family, like owner operated business. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important.
And speaking of the long term, like, what is the long term vision? You guys are continuing to open up new locations. You've mentioned that franchising was never something you're interested in. What do you envision kind of the next, let's say, 10 years looking like?
Yeah, so as we think about our growth, I think about it on a few vectors. One is scale. Our mission is to build healthier communities by connect people to real food. And I think the impact we can make at scale is really can be transformative if we do it at scale. We think about the impact on the supply chain, on the environment, on the well-being of our team members and their growth and development, and of course on serving healthy food and having access to healthy food for our customers. That is a big mission that I think at scale can have a huge impact on the world. So one is scaling our footprint. Create more, open as many restaurants as we can. One day thousands of restaurants around the country and eventually around the world to have more places to be able to eat Sweetgreen. Within that scale, I think there's a lot of evolution around what the actual experience will be. One is, Sweetgreen started off as a salad restaurant. Today, we're not really a salad restaurant anymore. Salads is actually not a huge part. It's a large part of our menu, but warm bowls are bigger, and now plates are becoming a huge part of our menu. So as we lean into a broader menu that is focused on the same ideals around how we source the food, how we prepare the food that is delicious and nutritious, that should stay the same. But the form factor in which it shows up in a plate, whether it be, a plate or different kinds of food that can meet a broader array of customers and occasions, is something that we're very, very focused on. And you've seen a lot of that evolution. It's going to continue in a really major way. The third vector is, I think, the how of how do you get the food now? So it's where we are, what we serve, and then how you get it. And I think that's going to evolve a lot. This past 10 years has been defined by digital transformation. Today, 60% of our business is digital. So 60% of people are actually not ordering food directly in our restaurants. It's kind of crazy to think. If you think back in 2009 when we started this, I always actually remember Steve Case once at a board meeting. He's like, because it was like 5% of sales digital. He's like, what would you do? He's like, how would you design your restaurants and your company if one day 50% of your business was digital? And I actually thought like it was never going to get to 50. It's at 60 today. But now thinking about like, how do we reach customers? Digital, I think, will continue to be a huge part of it, but how we use our technology to connect with consumers and how that elevates the experience, I think, will change a lot. Specifically around AI, I think personalization is going to be a really big thing for us. We have the ability, given the menu ingredient variety we have, and as we can learn more about you, the menu should go from a Sweetgreen menu to your Sweetgreen menu. So if we know more about you, as we get to learn more about you through what you buy or what you tell us, we can start to curate a menu that is really tailored to your taste, nutrition, lifestyle, etc.
But using the same ingredients that you have.
But we can make billions of things. That's the thing about like a menu today is kind of archaic. Like the times, the number of types of combinations that we can make. We only show 12 or 15 because that's all we can fit on a menu. We don't want to overload you. Right. But it's imagine like your social media feed where it's like made for you. Your menu should start to be made for you. So that's one kind of way that we will start to deliver the actual experience in a different way. Another is actually the how we make the food. And we've been heavily invested in an automation initiative. About 2 years ago, we acquired a company called Spice, and we've now opened 2 automated restaurants. The idea around automation for us is we looked at the restaurant experience and what is the magic of Sweetgreen is how we make the food, the actual culinary, like the freshness. We cook it from scratch. It's all fresh. And it's the hospitality component, that connecting. Then there's this middle component, especially for like the digital orders, where food is just assembled, right? It's almost a little bit of like a manufacturing, like just put the food in the bowls. And some of that's on the front lines can be great, but it's a very tough, it can be a very hard job, and it can also be, it leads to a lot of errors. Our biggest like detractors from an experience are people sometimes get their order wrong. Maybe it's not on time. Maybe we could serve more customers faster. And so we think that automation can be a huge solve for this. That can make the team member jobs better. Instead of having to do that piece, they can focus on the hospitality. They can focus on the cooking and the culinary aspect. And that automation can help on the middle. It can help us serve customers faster, more consistently. And we believe over time can actually help us from a price perspective in our mission to kind of democratize in a further way. So 2 restaurants have been opened with what we call the infinite kitchen technology today. We'll open another 10 or so between new and retrofits this year. And over time, we see much more of our both new and existing restaurants having an automation component that we think will just elevate that experience.
John, earlier on in the podcast, you mentioned how, only a few restaurants per generation like really break out and are these big brand names, whether it's like, again, the McDonald's is the In-N-Outs, all the other examples that you gave earlier on. Why is that? And what does it take to be one of those restaurants?
We think about that a lot. I think that it takes a lot of things. I think one, it starts with a really great product. You need a product that people love and love widely. So you look at a company like Chipotle's for 3,500 restaurants. Starbucks, I think, is at like 37,000. Yeah. So I think you need something that has wide appeal and has high frequency. So something that people can eat often. That's where Starbucks is great. Chipotle is pretty good, and that's something that we do really well. It's something that you can eat very often. The second, I think timing matters of when you do it, and I think we were very lucky in the time in which we started. I think a lot of it comes down to, there's a financial piece of unit economics, of having unit economics that can fuel your growth. So like, how do the actual stores do? And then there's this part about restaurants that is just not valued. It's really an execution business. It's a people business. We like to say our most important ingredient is people. Mm-hmm. And I can have 2 restaurants that are like in equally great locations, and one has a great head coach, which is our manager, and one is not as good one, and the results are radically different.
Right.
So we have the great restaurant companies really figure out how to scale culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really the key to the ones that win, because unlike software where it's like, all right, you got it, and you just, or like even like CPG, or like you're selling a good, like if you have something that, you know, you have a shoe that people love, it's like, okay, just sell more of it. And the product is pretty much, you make it in a factory somewhere and you sell more of it.
Right.
Restaurants it's still a hospitality business.
Right. One bad experience is the one that sticks in your mind.
Correct. And so the companies that have done great, you see, is why we are all so focused on people and culture, is the way to win is scaling culture and doing, and for us, I think it's how we do it, you know, around these core values and leadership principles that makes us, you know, we serve, you know, 225, you know, restaurants across the country, such different, you know, places, and to serve a consistent experience every time.
And that was my next question, and you had a better segue than I would have had. But you know, there are a lot of issues today with labor and a lack of labor and rising labor costs and all the negative things around labor. And then you have automation that's thrown at it. How are you guys dealing with that challenge of the lack of labor, but also the right people, right? Like, you know, to your point about culture, it's not just the quantity, it's the quality of the people. So how do you guys at Sweetgreen work around that challenge?
Yeah, we spend probably equal or more time thinking about how we, you know, our team members and how we find the right people, grow the right people, and, you know, train them, as we do about acquiring customers, because it's the enablement is really a hard part of the business. So there's a lot of things we do, from how we select talent. We have a very specific process around, you know, where we look, what we look for, and what are things we can teach you and what are things we can't. We can teach you how to run a restaurant. We can teach you how to work in it. But there's certain things around hospitality that we just can't, you know, and just that
you have it or you don't.
You have it or you don't. And by the way, we're not perfect at it, but I think we're pretty good at trying to find those right people. So that's one piece of it. There's a lot around what we offer and the benefits that we offer, the pay that we offer. We offer a competitive wage. We introduced tipping last year, which is adding a lot to everybody's bottom line for our team members. We offer flexible schedules. We offer a great benefits package. But I think the two things that we offer that are really unique versus the competition are the ability to grow. Really, like
there's a path for you.
You know, we're a growing company. You know, we're growing rapidly and opening a lot of new stores. And like right now, we had a bunch of our, you know, our ops team here today as an example. And we had, you know, one of our guys who's like an RGM, runs a region. So he runs 60 stores across the Midwest. And he started here as an assistant coach. And that's really powerful that you can join here as an assistant coach, essentially an hourly position, and now be making very good money running a whole region, effectively as CEO of a region. And we have many, many stories like that because of our growth trajectory and our focus on internal development. We really aim to hire and to grow for most of our leadership positions, from the head coach through our area leaders, et cetera, to be from the inside. And it's a win-win-win. It's great for them and it's great for the culture, but it's also, they end up being better employees.
Right.
The other thing that I think is, again, the X factor for us specifically is the mission. You know, and I think people today are really looking for some purpose in their life. And I think coming to a company that they believe in the values and they believe is doing good in the world, I think is the other thing. But all to say, just like you have to think about your competitive advantage and your differentiators for your customers, we have to think about that just as much for our employee base. Do
people really care? I mean, and I'm asking this more as a devil's advocate, but do people really care about the mission? Like, if it comes down to mission versus pay me more, like, do they care?
So I think the pay is like, you got to compete.
It's a given.
You got to compete on pay.
Right.
So I don't know if you're gonna pay me 20% less for the
mission's unbelievable.
Yeah, I don't know if that's gonna if that's gonna fly for a lot of people.
Right.
But if the pay is the same, and one company you believe in, one company you don't, well, you're gonna go to that one company you believe in. So that's why I said it's the X factor. You still got to compete on all the other things as well.
Yeah. Well, John, this has been a pleasure to have you on the show and learn about where you came from and your story and everything you're building. It sounds like there's a lot of exciting things on the horizon. And yeah, we're excited to see what happens next with you and Sweetgreen and the future.
Thank you guys. Great chatting with you.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.